Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this conversation that we are going to have on narratives on migration. This is the first one of a series that we would like to have within the context of the work that we all do together within the Global Forum for Migration and Development and its ad hoc working group on public narratives on migration. It's also a very great honor for United Cities and local governments as part of the mayor's mechanism to be facilitating this session. Some of you might ask yourselves, so why do we start with Canada? Well, because Canada is a very active member of that ad hoc working group of public narratives on migration, but also because Canada has many cities that are championing this transformation, this change on the narratives, and trying to find a balance around how we perceive migration and human mobility. We have all put together with the support of the International Organization on Migration, an international campaign that we call It Takes a Community. Because at the end of the day, being a migrant is just an status, right? We are neighbors, all of us are potential migrants, have been migrants at some point in our lives, and migration builds communities, and human mobility should be perceived as a very natural take. So I have two great partners here that are going to be joining me in this, what we hope will be a very dynamic conversation. We've got Nadia Bastien with us, and Nadia has been, works as directrice du service de la diversité et de l'inclusion sociale de la ville de Montréal. And we've got our colleague, David Hickey, a special advisor to the Deputy Minister and Associate Deputy Minister on Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship of the government of Canada. And so they both are sensitive around this issue, have been working around it a lot. And so we want to hear from you how you are experiencing this work that you are doing, and what does it mean for you to be working on this work. So Nadia, I would start with asking you both to introduce yourselves, your own perspective of how you are linked with this, and then we'll start with the questions. Nadia Bastien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Thank you, and nice to be here. I'm very happy to be here with you today. So as you stated, I've been newly appointed directrice de service de la diversité et de l'inclusion sociale at the City of Montreal.
I am having some problems with the sound. I don't hear you well, Nadia. I don't know if David has the same problem, or is it me?
Are you? Right. You're not hearing me very well? Is that what it is?
It cuts off.
Okay. Is it any better now?
It is better. Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So as I was saying, what we actually, our work and our services is to promote solidarity, diversity, and inclusion for all Montrealers, and especially related to these topics with migration, as Montreal's population is very diverse. We have more than over 120 different intercultural people within our population. So it's very important for us, and it's a statement the city has taken throughout the years to perpetuate and to enable that intercultural discourse and conversation between migrants and the rest of the population in order to bring people together, to bridge people together. So it's a very important matter for us, and I'm very happy to be here today with you.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Your sound is still tricky. We have been able to understand how you perceive work and what you're trying to do there. But let us see, while David presents his role in this field, whether you can solve your sound issues. So, David Hickey, how do you perceive your role from where you stand at the office of the minister? You are muted.
I've been in the Department of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship for about 15 years now. So I've been involved in these issues on migration and narratives around them for quite some time. Before my current role, which is pretty new, I was heading up the communications branch in the department. So fairly closely involved in this, involved in launching our Immigration Matters campaign. And you know, immigration to the country of Canada is increasing. So in my current role, I'm looking at how we continue to sort of support immigration and through narratives and particularly at the community level, as increasingly we have immigrants going not just to our big cities but throughout the country.
Thank you very much. Let us talk about what does it look like to lead on narratives. What can the different levels of government do to actually transform the way that we are talking about mobility and migration? Some people might argue that they cannot actually do much. And some others might argue that, well, narratives are narratives, you know, I mean, you need to walk the talk, you need to put things in place. How important is this? Do you want to start, Nadia?
I can start, hoping that you hear me better. Do you hear me a little better? Great. So as you said, it is very important to do so. And I think, I mean, there's not a one size fits all response to that, but clearly I think taking formal commitments to engage into this inclusion is very important. And I believe the City of Montreal has done so throughout the years through public action plans dedicated, especially or devoted entirely to issues related to immigration. We've clearly done so again recently with a new strategic plan that we have for that's called Montreal 2030, where the city really emphasizes its role, taking the need for more inclusive recovery, especially after this year we've all been through, and that places also human rights and equity at the center of every decision the city is about to take. So I think for cities like Montreal or any other cities, those formal commitments are really, I think, a first steps to contribute to making the change. Also, appointing dedicated resources to this matter is also very important. For instance, the service that I'm directing right now, the Diversity and Social Inclusion Service. We also have within our service Montreal's Newcomer Integration Office. We've newly appointed also as a city an Anti-Racism and Discrimination Commissioner, who also takes active action and effective actions on this matter. And of course, the International Relation Office also that plays a big role. And I would also continue saying that one very important thing in that leadership is also partnership. So the cities, yes, we have a role in all those local matters because the population lives within our neighborhoods, within the city. But of course, it's very important to mention that the city's leadership in these matters is also done in complementarity and partnership with both federal and provincial governments. And David, I'm sure will agree with that those partnerships to make sure that within our respective responsibilities that we each make a difference, but contribute to the same goal to work towards.
Sure. I mean, you need to. This is a whole of society, whole of government transformational process that we need to go through, right? And so you also need the communities to be partnered in this transformation. And I think that the organized civil society, the NGOs, the diaspora, they play a very important role in this. How do you perceive the kind of leadership that you are playing? I think Canada is playing a very important leadership at international level. I think that's very, very important. That's part of the work that you are doing within the Global Forum on Migration for Development and this specific working group that we are working together on. But how do you perceive this leadership, David?
Yeah, well, I think Nadia has underlined some really important points at a local level, and from a national government perspective, I think there's a few areas where we can play an important role. I think it's interesting we're having this conversation against the backdrop of the conversation on the Sustainable Development Goals. And when you look at the one on migration, it's really about well-managed migration and having the policies and the planning to sort of make that happen. And so from a communications and narrative perspective, I think there's an important role in telling that story as sort of a first step in a sort of a backdrop context that against which you can, do some creative things around storytelling. And I'll give you an example of that from my own history here in the movement of Syrian refugees back in 2015 and 16, when Canada undertook in a period of a couple months to bring in 25,000 Syrian refugees, which I know in the context of global migration isn't really a huge number, but in Canada, this was a big deal. And Canadians were hugely enthusiastic about this. We could not sort of keep up with the demand for people to get involved. But at the beginning of this project, we had, lots of questions from journalists in Canada and indeed internationally about security and how we could, people were behind the humanitarian effort, but questions about how we could take people in such a short period of time, so many people, and assure Canadians that we were taking them from a violent part of the world, but we weren't going to take any dangerous people in the mix. And we had to spend a considerable amount of time talking about, the process and the importance of that, and how we did pay attention to security and work with partners. And it was only once we'd really sort of addressed that question and put it aside that we could fully embrace the humanitarian effort and do storytelling and lots of great things to bring Canadians alongside on that. And so I think that well-managed story is part of it. Nadia mentioned partnerships, and I think that's absolutely key. And, that's important at a community level. But one of the things I think we can do at a national government level is look at community a little bit differently, potentially. And that certainly there's a geographic aspect to community, but we've also had some success in thinking through community in a broader aspect. And so, as we tell stories, for example, if you tell stories about athletes, immigrant athletes who are having an impact in their communities, but then looking at people who are interested in that sport across the country or around the world, and looking at community from that perspective and say, how do you tap into community in that way? And I think the campaign on It Takes a Community is doing a bit of a masterful job on that, and some of the takeovers with youth and business and civil society, etc. So looking at community a little bit differently, we bring resources in to sort of do polling and sort of get a pulse check on how Canadians are thinking about these issues. And that is informed, for example, Canadians both have concerns about the impact of immigration on jobs and economy, but they also recognize that we're an aging population and that we need immigration for the economy. So storytelling that highlights some of those things like the impact on the economy become important. And we sort of get a feel for that by polling and knowing what people's concerns are. And then the last thing I would say is just, as mentioned, the international partnerships and being part of fora like this, I think is a role for the federal government to do, and to sort of help connect others in our own networks to the great international work going on in this space.
Yeah, I think it's funny, one of the things that we notice as the constituency gathered under the mayor's mechanism is that the reactions of the public change depending from which perspective you are asking the question. So if you're asking the question from this macro perspective, this macroeconomic perspective, then they might express concern, etc. If you ask the question from the perspective of the neighborhood, about the next door neighbor, they are no longer the same reactions. None of them will say, I've got a problem with my next door neighbor because they come from Spain or Pakistan, or so I think getting rid of that part of the equation for the discussion among levels of government, I think that might be also very important. And we have also found out that detaching this from border discussions, and you brought in security, and that's also a very relevant thing. We are not naive about it, so we know we need to have this discussion, but it is important to simply tackle this as people and communities that we are building together, livelihood. And I think that that's also what you do in campaigns like Immigration Matters Canada and Pour Ferme, the campaign in Montreal. So I would like to go to both of you to talk to us about those campaigns and how you think they are changing the way we are talking about migration. Nadia?
Yes, well, it's a very interesting topic indeed, and a necessity also. And we have conducted very recently a large campaign called Closed Doors, Porte Fermée, in order to really illustrate the challenges that the population faces. So this whole campaign was part of a wider strategy called Montreal Inclusive at Work that intended to tackle this issue on 3 levels. So the first level was to create awakening. The second one was to engaging employers and workers. And then we also had a third level where we aimed at developing abilities, creating tools for people to walk the talk, as you said, Emilia, earlier. So in January 2020, so right before this whole crisis we got ourselves into, the City of Montreal launched a public campaign called Closed Doors, as I said, which was a unique experience. It was the first experience for the city also to take such a public action and statement. So how it actually worked out was that we created a stunt set up in a public hallway of a very busy building where we held 10 red huge doors to express the idea of those closed doors. And as the public walked through these doors, there was the key message of the campaign expressing how for immigrants, looking for a job means very often more doors closing and fewer doors opening. So the message was related around how even though this takes place, Montreal's immigration is highly qualified. They're chosen for their economical background and ability to contribute to the city's vitality. And there was very many calls to action, for people to engage and to act upon this and letting them know how they can all make a difference, that they all held a key in able to opening those doors, that they were all part of the solution, because mostly this is what we try to do to make people understand. As you said, it's one thing to know that your neighbor comes from a different background, but to realize that you also have an action to take in order to create that rapprochement somehow. So the campaign, besides that stunt, the campaign also included outdoor publicity on bus shelters. We also had a website, publication in newspapers. We also engaged different companies and different stakeholders from the Montreal economical world to contribute and to engage into that campaign also, to sensitize as much people as possible. And I must admit, we're pretty proud of the results of the campaign, where, I mean, this closed door day that had started on January 15, but that was held for 5 weeks. Just a few results, just to let you know that the digital platform was visited by over 54,000 users. Social media content was shared 7 million times. The YouTube videos generated a lot of views, also more than 400. So we're really glad that it has created, and we believe it has increased awareness, which is so important if we want to create that inclusion and let people understand that they do have a role to play in immigrants' inclusion.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I mean, it's about making it personal for people. It needs to be made personal, and it needs to, and people also need to understand that that is something that they can be as well. I mean, that you are not a migrant now, but in a couple of minutes you might be one, and you know, it can be about you. And the issue of partnerships, I think, is also extremely important. So any words, David, on migration matters? I think you have already started to share some things with us about economic impact. There is a lot of false news going around about how much migration costs us. I know that there are many countries in the world where there are very negative campaigns about how much money our governments are investing in newcomers. So I think this economic perspective is extremely important, but it's more than that, right? It's also about the diversity that we get, the kind of skills that we can get as countries. David, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would agree. I think the economy is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And so, you know, we started our Immigration Matters campaign. It was actually motivated out of some polling, which showed that you know, we've been polling for quite a few years, and we asked a question on how people feel about immigration, their support for immigration, and we asked one question that phrases that. And thinking about that from a Canadian national perspective, how do you feel about immigration? Then, how do you feel about that on, you know, the impact of immigration on your province? How do you feel about immigration and its impact on your community and your neighborhood? And what we saw was that people bought into, you know, it's a little bit bred in the bone here in Canada. People bought into it at a national level more than they did at a local level. When it came to sort of assessing the impact of immigration on their neighborhood, they were a little bit less convinced than they were sort of thinking about immigration in Canada globally. And so what we took from that was a challenge that we had to sort of demonstrate the impact of immigrants on their communities. And historically, we'd sort of done this by looking at success stories and saying how immigrants succeed. And we sort of had to flip that a little bit to show not how immigrants succeed, but how communities succeed through immigration. And that really, you know, was a subtle shift, but it was an important shift in sort of how we tell stories. And our campaign sort of highlights some of that. So, you know, there's lots of good examples in there. We're fond of one in the small community of Charlottetown, PEI, where the skating rink was a local skating rink was going to close because they didn't have enough people subscribing. And then the Chinese Canadian community got behind it, and lots of young people enrolled to take figure skating lessons and revitalize the club. And you know, there's nothing quite more Canadian than skating. So the fact that an immigrant community can help to keep that alive was, you know, I thought a very tangible and touching story of the power of immigration to you know, to impact a community. So we've been looking at stories like that, and I think been successful in finding them and telling them.
Well, thank you very much. I really like that perspective. That it's not only about talking about the individual success, it's also because I think what we are trying to promote here is this collective responsibility that we have, right? Is this collective effort and collective perception and collective success that we need to have as communities, which I think is very relevant. And so now the tough question of the bunch, which is, what next? What do we need to change structurally to actually advance on this? I have to confess, I do really see a lot of progress in the narrative, and I see the groups that are listening to this broadening, and I also see clearly that more and more local and regional governments around the world are putting this at the heart of their policy making. So I see a lot of progress, and that networks such as ours, United Cities and Local Governments, with around 250,000 members around the world, have that at the core of the agenda, means something. But why aren't we progressing as fast as we would like? What are the structural changes, the long-term conditions that we would need to touch upon to actually make a difference? David, do you want to start first and then we go to Nadia?
Sure, I could talk about this for a while because I've certainly given a lot of
I had a feeling.
to what happens next on our Immigration Matters campaign and where it fits in the global perspective. So, I might share a couple thoughts on that, and maybe a couple stories, examples on it. One is a story about a missed opportunity that was a reminder to me on the importance of storytelling. And then we got a second chance at it during the pandemic. And this harkens back to asylum seekers. And we had a real influx a couple of years ago of asylum seekers coming into Quebec, actually. And so as we faced questions around that, the real priority for me was sort of back to question one, right? We felt this need to sort of explain the process to Canadians who are saying, what's happening? And we were singularly focused on that sort of process answer to sort of try and prevent backlash that this was, uncontrolled or whatever. And so we didn't tell stories. And then when the pandemic hit in Canada, the place that it hit hardest was in long-term care homes. And we had, vulnerable seniors and high death rates in our long-term care homes from the pandemic. And asylum seekers, when they come to Canada, they get caught in a process that takes a few years, but they get a work permit. And so lots of people who were working on the front lines of the pandemic, including in long-term care homes, were asylum seekers. And so we kind of latched onto that and started to tell stories, but we can't really take much credit. The media sort of uncovered lots of stories, and it became a really big issue to the point that people were protesting, in the streets to sort of say, these people, despite the veracity of their asylum claims, have earned the right to stay in Canada. And so we, along with the government of Quebec, actually launched a program to do that. And it's just an example of the power of storytelling to change policy. And I think reflecting back on the initial movement of asylum, a missed opportunity there in sort of telling stories. So I think we need to remind ourselves of the power of storytelling as one example. And the second opportunity that I might sort of highlight, and it's a bit of a Canadian specific one, but maybe it has implications elsewhere, is I think one of the biggest issues facing Canada at the moment, sort of into our long-term future, is our relationship with our Indigenous peoples. And this is sort of really heightened in awareness for Canadians in the past couple of years, but really with some news in the past few months where we have found some unmarked graves on the property of residential schools where Indigenous children were taken in and taken from their families and put in these residential schools supported by the government and run by the Catholic Church. And this has really been a bit of a watershed moment in Canada where we're reflecting on our relationship with our Indigenous peoples. And of course, any immigrants who come into this country, inherit our history. And if we're going to welcome them onto this land, which Indigenous people would tell you is, their unceded territorial lands, I think we really need to think about the relationship between not just the entire Canadian population, but newcomers and Indigenous peoples, and find ways to build those connections and then tell stories around it to reflect them to ourselves on how important that is. And really, I just don't think Canada can hold itself up as an example to the world unless we better do a better job of that in the future. So, in terms of opportunities, I'm not sure, there may be other countries that have that with their Indigenous populations, but I think they all have some sort of social priorities that they're grappling with, and the importance of connecting your migrant population into those priorities and showing that they're part of the solution moving forward is really important. And then I know I'm going on, but if I could just touch on a third element on opportunity.
Yes, be brief because we still have Nadia and one more round.
Yeah, I think there's just an opportunity to sort of do more in connection that we're trying to do here on the international campaigns. Sometimes I wonder whether they're all very effective in their own right locally, but whether they're connected enough. And I look at campaigns like Black Lives Matter, which are so singular and so successful and so well branded as an entity, and wonder whether we're not a little bit too disparate in our approach, and whether we should think about that in fora like this.
Well, thank you very much. That is not an easy question, and I want to go back to you on this one, in this particular one, as we talk on the about the high-level political forum and what our expectations would be, because this might also be a very good space to explore some of that. But also very interesting, there is this saying in Africa that says that countries are the stories that they tell their children, and I think that is extremely relevant. It is true that who we play with, who we fantasize with, who we learn with, is how we build our acquis, our patrimony. And so I think that perspective is very, very important for our narrative work. Nadia, some thoughts on that structural change that we might need?
I'll be very brief, because I do agree with many things that David stated, especially as the first example you gave did also happen in Quebec, as you said, where we need to seize opportunities. And I think the pandemic was really an opportunity for us to create that idea where the public, to see the impact and the positive effect that the immigrants have had taking care of elderly during the pandemics. And it was, I think, one of the I'm going to name one of the challenges we faced throughout the campaign that I think is also something we need to tackle, was also, if we want to create that conversation and to change that narrative, it's very important also to find the right tone through those different campaigns. And what I mean by that is that very often those conversations are going on between what I will call the so-called people that are already convinced. We have those conversations amongst ourselves, or amongst the actors, the stakeholders that are already convinced of the importance to make a difference. But it's very important to make a broader, a much larger, and to take this conversation at a larger scale in order to involve different stakeholders that are very often called in the silent majority that doesn't take place, or that doesn't take action. So I think creating those awareness campaigns is also like planting a seed and contributing to change, fostering change in perceptions, and making it a long-term perspective, also, or a long-term process.
Thank you very much for that. Let us go. We only have about 15 minutes to close, and I would like to make the link between this work that we are doing. Often, as we work internationally, we work in silos. We have our own ecosystems where we see things evolving, and they don't necessarily connect with other ecosystems. We are doing our best to connect those dots. As David was saying, I think the examples that you were giving on the campaigns are very relevant, but also in terms of policy making processes, extremely important. If you look at the way that the high-level political forum discusses migration, is significantly different than when you sit in sessions of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, or the Global Compact. And in the joint statement of our constituency to the high-level political forum this year, we have called member states to acknowledge the critical role that migration plays in development. And also we have called upon member states to implement policy measures with local governments that uphold the human rights and migrants, but that also, in particular, see the links between different agendas like climate change, urbanization. And so that links SDG 10, 11, and 13 together, basically. That's what we are calling for. And so I was wondering, from where you stand, at local and national level, respectively. How are you looking at these? What are the key steps that you would recommend from a local government perspective? And I will start with Nadia, and then I will go to David from a national government perspective. And this will be our last round. Nadia.
Okay, well, I'll take back on many things we've said before. I think it's one of the most important things is to map our existing efforts. You know, we're doing things, we're conducting many efforts, but we need to map those efforts, set goals, targets, and identify also the gaps between those goals we've had and what we've achieved, and evaluate our results, and not only in terms of priorities, but also in terms of implementation of well-managed migration policies. Also, and David said it a little bit earlier, to engage in city diplomacy. I don't know if that's how to pronounce it, but it makes also cities' voice heard or included, and increase also multi-party collaboration. I said it earlier, we need to capitalize on complementarity. I mean, we do have some efforts we're making on the local level, but working on a broader, larger scale is also very important. And to participate in international initiatives, just like this one, networks of cities, bridging together our efforts. And David stated it also earlier, makes a larger conversation, and makes us achieve our goals better. I would also finish by reporting those progresses and those successes also to other cities and countries through those international networks is very important. Participate in those mechanisms to make the conversation at a broader scale is also a very important aspect of making a difference, if I could say.
Thank you very much, Nadia. You know that we are promoting the development of voluntary local reviews and voluntary subnational reviews that should complement the national contributions to the discussions in the high-level political forum. It's about the mapping of what you do, exactly. But it's also about the transformative power that can have. Because if you see something that is working at local level, who says it wouldn't be working also from a national perspective? So thank you very much for those inputs. David, I will add to the question, how do you feel that that your contacts with the networks, for instance, that are part of the mayor's mechanism is impacting the work that you are doing as Canada in the ad hoc working group?
Yeah, I think there's just so much we can learn from each other. So as Nadia has stressed, those kind of partnerships are just so valuable. And, you know, it's great that, you know, what we've done in the Immigration Matters campaign has helped to inform a little bit of what's happening in the It Takes a Community campaign, and then reciprocally we'll learn back from that. So I think those kind of partnerships are important. And then back to, you know, my previous point, I do think there's probably some thinking to do around how we sort of build on each other's campaigns. And so one of the organizations that I have a lot of admiration for is Welcoming International, and it's you know, founding organization Welcoming America, and they sort of put a lot of energy into focusing on a welcoming week in the fall. And I look at that as sort of an inspiration of sort of, you know, picking focal points during the year potentially to try and take campaigns which, you know, maybe are individual in nature, but we can bring them together at a certain time frame as one example of how we can collaborate and try and build some momentum and some media awareness around those kind of things. I just think there's a lot we could do on the partnership side. And then I think in the formal discussion, I think you're right. I'm seeing this a little bit in Canada as I've observed, you know, the conversation around immigration over the years. But, you know, how does the conversation around migration tie into the conversation around climate change is an interesting example, not just in terms of just the increased forced movements of people, but how does a country like Canada, bring in more immigrants and still achieve its climate change goals with a larger population? I think, those are big questions and warrant a significant discussion at that sort of international level. And increasingly, I think as a government, we're sort of looking at the impacts of immigration and trying to draw better links. And the other big example is infrastructure. Immigrants, move, lots of them, into big cities, and big cities like Toronto and Montreal have infrastructure stresses. So how do you make sure you have conversations with the right partners so that you prepare for those sort of increases in population and have the transportation and school and hospital and what have you infrastructure, recognizing that ultimately people move into communities and those communities need to be ready to support. So yeah, lots of work to be done on a partnership level, I think.
Well, thank you very much for those inspiring words and those inspiring stories. We should never forget how important it is for those that have moved away from their homes, very often in very difficult situations, to be talked about, to be made visible, and to be made a priority of any level of government. We should not underestimate how important it is to see the mayor of Montreal coming out and saying that Montreal welcomes people, and how important it is for the premier of any country to come out and say that we realize our country is diverse and we need that diversity because it makes us stronger. So I think it is extremely relevant to keep that in mind, and at the same time that we work on that we transform the way that our children experience migration at school and understand who they are with and who they learn with, that we walk the talk. And the last thing I want to leave with you, thank you for this very interesting interview. I could go on talking with you forever, but I need to close in the next couple of minutes, reminding those of you that are following us online that following the endorsement of the Marrakesh Declaration by local governments in 2018, to fulfill the Global Compact on Migration and also the Global Compact on Refugees at unison, the Mayor's Mechanism has launched a call to action to turn those commitments into specific activities and initiatives. And we are starting to review them and implement them at the International Migration Review Forum in 2022 and the Global Forum of Refugees in 2023. So we want to shift the narratives from a border-centered to a people-centered narrative. I think your discussions today, your inputs today will be very valuable for this process. We will keep everybody informed about the progress that we have made, and we will be giving more updates on this next autumn. So if you could summarize in one sentence, each of you, how you feel about this work on migration and what it takes to make a difference, what would you say? Let us start with Nadia. One sentence, Nadia.
One sentence. Well, that's a tough challenge, but I would say that, there's no one size fits all solution when it comes to migration. It remains a global issue, and sharing our challenges, sharing our successes with others, I find is key to finding and mostly accelerating the implementation of sustainable solutions. So let us continue having those conversations.
Thank you very much, Nadia. David.
I think I would say that my one sentence would be believe in the power of storytelling and use it as a way to sort of show the strengths and the joys of diversity. Yeah.
Thank you very much, David. We believe in the power of storytelling. We need to do it together, and no one size fits all. And I would say, make it personal, because it is a personal perspective for a collective result. Thank you so much to all the partners, to our colleagues, the MMC, the Mayors Migration Council, to our friends of the International Organization on Migration, to all the colleagues that are devoted to this work, and congratulations, Canada, for leading the way. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.